The rain came down in torrents, turning the streets of Manhattan into rivers of chaos. Sarah Chen clutched her 4-year-old daughter Emma's hand tightly as they hurried down what she thought was West 42nd Street. The GPS on her cracked phone screen had given up 20 minutes ago, and now the battery was dying. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whimpered, her pink raincoat doing little to protect her from the downpour that seemed to attack from every direction. "It's okay, baby. We'll find the subway station soon," Sarah lied, her voice barely audible over the thunderclap that shook the glass windows of the towering buildings around them. She had been in New York for exactly 3 days, having moved from their small apartment in Cleveland after losing her job at the local accounting firm. The promise of a better life had brought them here, but right now, lost and soaked to the bone, that promise felt like a cruel joke. Sarah's cheap umbrella had surrendered to the wind 2 blocks ago, leaving them completely exposed to the storm. Her job interview at the financial consulting firm was supposed to be tomorrow, and her only decent business suit was getting ruined by the minute. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was drowning in debt, and now she was literally drowning in a New York downpour. "Excuse me," she called out to a businessman rushing past, his expensive coat barely touched by the rain thanks to his high-end umbrella. He didn't even look her way, disappearing into the crowd of equally hurried New Yorkers. Emma started crying, and Sarah felt her own tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. They had been walking for over an hour, and every street looked the same in this concrete jungle. The weight of her decision to come here pressed down on her shoulders heavier than the rain itself. That's when she saw him. A man in his early 30s sat on a bench under a small awning outside a 24-hour diner, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around him. Unlike everyone else rushing past, he appeared calm, almost meditative, as he watched the storm. His clothes were simple, worn jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and beat-up sneakers that had definitely seen better days. But there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that caught Sarah's attention. "Mommy, look," Emma pointed toward the man. "He's not running." Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her not to approach strangers, especially in a city like New York. But desperation has a way of overriding caution, and she found herself walking toward the man. "Excuse me," she called out as they approached. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we're completely lost." The man looked up, and Sarah was struck by his eyes, kind, intelligent, and surprisingly warm despite the cold rain. He stood up immediately, his full attention on them. "Are you okay?" His voice was gentle, concerned. "You both look soaked. We're trying to find the nearest subway station. My phone died, and we've been walking in circles." Sarah's voice cracked slightly with exhaustion. Without hesitation, the man pulled out his phone, not the latest iPhone she might have expected, but an older model that had clearly been well used. "You're actually pretty close to Times Square station. It's about 4 blocks that way." He pointed east, but in this weather. He looked at Emma, who was shivering despite her raincoat. "There's a subway entrance just 2 blocks down this street. Much closer." "Thank you so much," Sarah breathed, relief washing over her. "Wait," the man said as they started to leave. "Take this." He pulled off his hoodie, revealing a simple white t-shirt underneath. "For the little one. She looks cold." "Oh no, I couldn't." "You'll get soaked," Sarah protested. "I'm already wet." He smiled, kneeling down to Emma's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she whispered shyly. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Mike," he said, wrapping his hoodie around Emma's small frame. It was way too big, but it was dry and warm. "There you go. Now you look like a superhero with a cape." Emma giggled for the first time all day, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This stranger's simple kindness was more than she'd experienced from anyone since arriving in the city. "I'm Sarah," she said, "and I can't thank you enough." "Don't mention it," Mike replied, but as they prepared to leave again, he seemed to hesitate. "Look, I know this might sound forward, but that diner behind me serves great hot chocolate, and you both look like you could use some warming up before heading back out there." Sarah's instinct was to politely decline, but Emma tugged on her coat. "Mommy, can we? I'm really cold." Looking at her daughter's hopeful face and feeling the stranger's genuine concern, Sarah found herself nodding. "Just for a few minutes. To warm up." As they walked toward the diner, Sarah couldn't help but wonder about this kind stranger, who had appeared exactly when they needed help most. In a city of 8 million people, what were the odds? She had no idea that the man walking beside them, who had introduced himself simply as Mike, was actually Michael Harrison, one of the youngest billionaires in America. heir to Harrison Industries, and currently one of the most sought-after bachelors, according to Forbes magazine. He had been taking one of his regular reality walks through the city, dressed down and anonymous, trying to remember what normal life felt like away from boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But right now, he was just Mike, a stranger helping a mother and daughter find their way in the storm. The warmth of Tony's diner hit them like a gentle embrace as they stepped inside, steam rising from their soaked clothes. The smell of fresh coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches filled the air, and for the first time since arriving in New York, Sarah felt like she could breathe. 3 hot chocolates? Asked the waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Make that 2 hot chocolates and a coffee for me, Mike corrected gently. And maybe some of those chocolate chip cookies for the little lady. Emma's eyes lit up, and she looked to Sarah for permission. Sarah nodded, her heart warm with gratitude for this stranger's continued kindness. They settled into a corner booth, Emma sliding in next to Mike while Sarah sat across from them. The warmth was slowly returning to their bodies, and Emma had stopped shivering in Mike's oversized hoodie. So, Mike said, stirring his coffee, what brings you to New York? You don't sound like you're from around here. Sarah hesitated. She'd learned early in life that people don't really want to hear about your problems, especially strangers. But something about Mike's genuine interest made her want to open up. We moved here from Cleveland 3 days ago, she said finally. I have a job interview tomorrow, well, today, now I guess, at a financial consulting firm. That's exciting, Mike said. What kind of work do you do? I'm an accountant. Was an accountant? Sarah corrected herself. The company I worked for went under 6 months ago. I've been looking for work ever since, but opportunities in Cleveland are. She trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was making excuses. Limited, Mike finished understanding. So you decided to take a leap and come to the big city? Something like that. Sarah watched Emma carefully dunking her cookie in her hot chocolate, completely absorbed in the process. It wasn't really a choice. We were about to lose our apartment, and I had some money saved up for emergencies. This felt like the last shot at building something better for Emma. Mike studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw despite the exhaustion in her eyes. That takes incredible courage. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Courage or stupidity? I'm still figuring out which one. Definitely courage, Mike said firmly. I've met a lot of people in business, and most of them wouldn't have the guts to start over in a new city with a child to care for. Are you in business? Sarah asked, curious about this thoughtful stranger. Mike paused for just a moment. Something like that. I work in consulting. It wasn't entirely a lie, he did consult on major business decisions, just usually for his own company. What about Emma's father, if you don't mind me asking? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. He decided that being a father was too much responsibility. Haven't heard from him since Emma was 2. I'm sorry, Mike said quietly. That must be incredibly difficult. We manage, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. We manage just fine on our own. Mike admired the fierce protectiveness in her voice. He'd grown up with everything handed to him, but this woman was fighting for every opportunity, every chance to give her daughter a better life. Mommy, can we live here? Emma asked suddenly, looking around the cozy diner. It's warm, and Mike is nice. Both adults laughed, and Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. We can't live in a diner, sweetheart. Actually, Mike said, an idea forming. Where are you staying tonight? Sarah's cheeks flushed. There's a small hotel near the Port Authority. It's not great, but it's what we can afford until I hopefully get this job. Mike knew the area she was talking about. It wasn't safe, especially not for a woman alone with a child. Before he could stop himself, he was speaking. Listen, this might sound crazy, but I have a friend who owns a small bed and breakfast in Brooklyn. Nice neighborhood, clean, safe. She's always looking for people to help out, cleaning, basic maintenance, that sort of thing, in exchange for a room. Would you be interested in something like that? Just until you get on your feet. Sarah stared at him. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Mike looked at Emma, who was now drawing pictures in the condensation on the window, completely content. Let's just say I believe in paying it forward. Someone helped me out once when I needed it most. That was true, in a way. His grandfather had taught him that with great wealth came great responsibility, not just to shareholders, but to people who needed help. But he couldn't tell Sarah that. She was proud, that much was clear, and she needed to feel like she was earning her way. I couldn't just take charity, Sarah said firmly. It's not charity, Mike insisted. Sophie, that's my friend really does need help. Especially with the morning cleaning before guests check in. It would be a legitimate arrangement. Sarah considered this. The hotel they were staying at had cost them $40 for one night, money they couldn't really afford to spend. If this was real. Could I meet her first? Your friend? Of course, Mike said, pulling out his phone. Let me call her now. As Mike stepped away to make the call, Sarah watched him through the diner window. There was something about the way he carried himself, the confidence in his voice when he spoke on the phone, that didn't quite match his casual appearance. But then again, she'd learned that appearances could be deceiving. Good news, Mike said, returning to the table. Sophie says she'd love to meet you both tomorrow. She's got a room available, and she could really use some help with the morning shift. I can't believe this is happening, Sarah murmured. Sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be, Mike said softly. Emma looked up from her drawing. Are you an angel, Mike? Mike laughed, a genuine, warm sound. Definitely not an angel, kiddo. Just someone who was in the right place at the right time. As they prepared to leave the diner, Sarah realized that this stranger, this kind, mysterious man who had appeared out of nowhere, might have just changed the course of their entire lives. She had no idea that tomorrow, when she walked into her job interview, she would be meeting with a subsidiary of the very company that Mike would inherit. And Mike had no idea that the brave, determined woman he'd just helped would soon become the most important person in his life. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Sophie's bed and breakfast in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Sarah had barely slept, partly from nerves about her interview, and partly from the surreal turn their lives had taken in less than 24 hours. Sophie turned out to be exactly as Mike had described, a warm, energetic woman in her 60s who immediately took Emma under her wing and offered Sarah not just a room, but a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in months. Your friend Mike called this morning, Sophie said as she helped Sarah with her hair in the small mirror by the window. He wanted to make sure you got here safely and that you had everything you needed for your interview. He's very thoughtful, Sarah replied, adjusting the collar of her suit jacket. The rain had left it slightly wrinkled, but it was the best she had. He's a good man, Sophie agreed, known him for years. Always looking out for others, though he's got his own struggles. Sarah wanted to ask what she meant, but Emma came running into the room, already dressed and ready for the day in clothes that Sophie had somehow magically produced, hand-me-downs from her granddaughter, she'd explained. Mommy, Sophie says I can help her make muffins while you're at your meeting. If that's okay with you, Sophie added quickly. I used to run a daycare before I opened this place. Emma will be perfectly safe. The relief Sarah felt was overwhelming. She'd been dreading having to bring Emma to the interview, knowing it would make an already difficult situation even more challenging. An hour later, Sarah stood outside the gleaming glass building that housed Morrison Financial Consulting. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt fresh and clean, full of possibility. She took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors. The interview went better than she'd dared to hope. Ms. Rodriguez, the hiring manager, was impressed with Sarah's experience and her determination to relocate for better opportunities. The position was entry-level, but it came with health insurance and the possibility of advancement. I have to be honest with you, Sarah, Ms. Rodriguez said as they wrapped up. We've had several candidates for this position, but your willingness to take risks and start fresh tells me a lot about your character. I'll have a decision by the end of the week. Sarah walked out of the building feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. She was so focused on replaying the interview in her mind that she almost missed the familiar figure sitting on a bench across the street. Mike looked up from the book he was reading and smiled when he saw her. How did it go? You waited for me? Sarah asked, surprised. I happened to be in the neighborhood, Mike said, though that wasn't entirely true. He'd rearranged his entire morning schedule to be here. You look like it went well. I think it did, Sarah said, allowing herself a small smile. Thank you for setting us up with Sophie. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay anything, Mike said, standing up. Want to grab some lunch? There's a great little place around the corner, and I'd love to hear how it went. As they walked, Sarah found herself studying Mike more closely. His clothes were still casual jeans and a button-down shirt, but she noticed the quality of his watch. The way other people seemed to look at him with recognition before quickly looking away. There was something he wasn't telling her, but she couldn't put her finger on what. The restaurant he chose was small and intimate, with white tablecloths and prices that made Sarah's eyes widen. Mike, This is too expensive, My treat, he said quickly. Consider it a celebration of your successful interview. You don't even know if I got the job yet. I have a good feeling about it, Mike replied, and something in his tone made Sarah wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. Over lunch, they talked about everything and nothing. Mike asked thoughtful questions about Emma, about Sarah's dreams for their future, about her accounting background. Sarah found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. Can I ask you something? Sarah said as they finished their meal. Of course. Who are you really? And don't say you're just Mike, who works in consulting. There's more to it than that. Mike felt his chest tighten. He'd been dreading this moment, knowing it would come eventually. He couldn't keep lying to her, but he also couldn't bear the thought of everything changing between them. It's complicated, he said finally. Try me. Mike looked out the window, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk. Normal people with normal lives, something he'd never really had. My full name is Michael Harrison, he said quietly. My family owns Harrison Industries. Sarah stared at him blankly for a moment, then her eyes widened. Harrison Industries. The Harrison Industries. The one that owns half of Manhattan. Among other things, yes. Sarah sat back in her chair, pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicking into place. The way people looked at him, his confidence, his ability to help her find a job and a place to stay with just a phone call. So you single quotes rich. Very rich, Mike said, his voice flat, and I understand if that changes things between us. Changes things how? Sarah asked, though her mind was reeling. Most people, when they find out who I am, they either want something from me or they assume I'm some spoiled rich kid who's never worked a day in his life. They can't see past the money. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had sat in the rain to help a lost stranger, who had given his sweatshirt to a cold child, who had made sure they had a safe place to stay without asking for anything in return. Is that why you were sitting alone in the rain yesterday? Hiding from your real life? Mike nodded. I do that sometimes. Put on regular clothes, walk around the city. Try to remember what it feels like to be normal. Most days, I'm trapped in boardrooms and charity galas, surrounded by people who only care about what I can do for them. That sounds lonely, Sarah said softly. It is, Mike admitted. Until yesterday. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing this revelation. Finally, Sarah spoke. I don't want anything from you, Mike. Michael. Whatever your name is. Yesterday, when you helped us, you didn't know that I'd find out who you are. You just did it because it was the right thing to do. And now that you know. Sarah thought about Emma, safe and happy with Sophie, probably covered in flour from making muffins. She thought about the interview that had gone so well, the chance at a new life that was finally within reach. Now I know that you're the same person who sat with us in that diner and made my daughter laugh when she was scared and cold. The money doesn't change that. Mike felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. There's something else you should know, he said. The company you interviewed with this morning, Morrison Financial Consulting, they're a subsidiary of Harrison Industries. I didn't arrange your interview, I swear. I had no idea you were meeting with them until you told me the name. Sarah processed this information. So if I get this job, you'd be working for one of my companies, technically. But Sarah, I want you to know that I would never interfere with their hiring decision. If you get this job, it's because you earned it. Sarah believed him. There was an honesty in his eyes that she'd learned to recognize, and she could tell that this revelation was as surprising to him as it was to her. This is all very overwhelming, she said finally. I know, and I understand if you need some time to process all of this. Sarah looked at this man who had turned her life upside down in the best possible way. Yesterday, she had been a single mother with no prospects and nowhere to turn. Today, she had hope for the first time in months. A potential job, a safe place for Emma, and what was she feeling for this kind, complicated stranger? Can I ask you one more thing? She said, anything. When you're not being Michael Harrison the billionaire. When you're just Mike sitting on a bench in the rain. What do you want? What makes you happy? Mike thought about it for a long moment. Yesterday, watching Emma laugh when I gave her my hoodie. Seeing you smile when you realized you weren't lost anymore. That's the happiest I've been in years. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. This wasn't just about gratitude anymore, and she could see in his eyes that he felt it too. I should get back to Emma, she said, though she didn't want this conversation to end. Of course, Mike said, signaling for the check. But Sarah, I hope this isn't goodbye. I'd like to see you again, both of you. I'd like that too, Sarah said, and meant it completely. As they walked back toward Brooklyn, both of them knew that their lives had just become infinitely more complicated. But for the first time in either of their lives, complicated felt like it might be worth it. 3 days later, Sarah got the call. She had gotten the job at Morrison Financial Consulting. As she hung up the phone, she looked around the cozy room at Sophie's bed and breakfast, where Emma was playing with a set of blocks, and felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. Good news? Sophie asked, appearing in the doorway with her warm smile. I got it, Sarah whispered, hardly believing it herself. I got the job. Sophie whooped with joy, and Emma looked up from her blocks with curiosity. What happened? Mommy got a job, sweetheart. We're going to stay in New York. Emma clapped her hands together. Can we see Mike again? The question Sarah had been avoiding thinking about. Since their lunch 3 days ago, she hadn't heard from Mike. She understood why he was probably giving her space to process everything he'd told her about his real identity. But she missed him, missed the easy way they talked, the way he looked at Emma with such genuine affection. I hope so, baby, Sarah said honestly. That evening, after Emma had gone to sleep, Sarah sat on the small balcony of their room, looking out at the Brooklyn street below. The neighborhood was quiet, family-friendly, nothing like the bustling chaos of Manhattan where they'd gotten lost in the rain just a few days ago. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Congratulations on the job. Sophie told me the good news. I'm very proud of you. Mike, Sarah stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you. For everything. Her phone rang almost immediately. I hope it's not too late to call. Mike's voice was warm and familiar. Not at all. Emma's asleep, and I was just thinking about how much has changed in less than a week. This time last week, we were packing up our entire life in Cleveland, and I was terrified that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. And now, Sarah looked through the window at Emma, sleeping peacefully in the comfortable bed, her face relaxed and content in a way it hadn't been in months. Now I think it might have been the best decision I ever made. I'm glad, Mike said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Listen, I know things are complicated with who I am and everything, but I was hoping we could still be friends. All three of us, just friends. Sarah asked before she could stop herself. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I don't want to pressure you, Sarah. You're starting a new job, a new life. The last thing you need is more complications. What if I want complications? Sarah asked softly. Another pause, longer this time. Then I'd say I've been hoping you'd say that for 3 days. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had since their lunch. Want to come over tomorrow evening? I could cook dinner. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for us. I'd love that. The next evening, Mike arrived at Sophie's bed and breakfast carrying a bouquet of flowers for Sarah and a small stuffed animal for Emma, a lion that she immediately named Rory and refused to put down. It's not much, Sarah said, gesturing to the simple meal she'd prepared, spaghetti and meatballs, garlic bread, and a salad. Sophie let me use her kitchen. It's perfect, Mike said, and he meant it. He couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for him, really cooked for him, not a chef or caterer, but someone who cared about him. Emma chattered throughout dinner, telling Mike about her adventures with Sophie, about the other families staying at the bed and breakfast, about the cat that lived in the garden behind the building. Mike listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at her stories. After dinner, they put Emma to bed together, Mike reading her a story while Sarah tucked her in. It felt natural, domestic in a way that surprised them both. She's amazing, Mike said as they settled on the small couch in the sitting area of their room. She is, Sarah agreed. She's been so brave through all of this. I was worried about uprooting her, taking her away from everything familiar. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for, Mike said. Especially when they have a mom who would do anything for them. Sarah looked at him curiously. You sound like you speak from experience. Mike was quiet for a moment. My parents died when I was 8. Car accident. I went to live with my grandfather, my father's father. He was a good man, but he was busy running the company, and I spent a lot of time with nannies and tutors. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly. That must have been so hard. But it taught me something important. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy the kind of love you give Emma. The way you put her needs before your own. The way you're building a life for her even when you're scared. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I am scared, she admitted. Every day, what if I can't handle this new job? What if I can't give her the life she deserves? Hey, Mike said, reaching for her hand. Look at what you've already accomplished. You took a huge risk, moved to a new city, found a job, found a safe place to live. You're already giving her the life she deserves. With a lot of help from a certain billionaire, Sarah pointed out with a small smile. All I did was point you in the right direction. The rest was all you. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, both thinking about how quickly their lives had changed. Mike, Sarah said finally. Yeah, what happens now? With us, I mean. Your life is board meetings and charity galas, and mine is, well, it's going to be getting Emma to school and working long hours to prove myself at a new job. Mike turned to face her fully. I've been thinking about that too. And I know it won't be easy. There will be challenges, media attention, people who might think you're with me for my money, the demands of my work. That's a lot of challenges, Sarah said quietly. It is, but Sarah, I haven't been this happy in years. Yesterday, when Sophie told me you got the job, I wanted to call you immediately to celebrate. This morning, I found myself wondering what Emma would think of the zoo in Central Park. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking about a future that includes more than just work. Sarah felt her heart skip. And what does that future look like? Honestly. Sunday morning pancakes and bedtime stories. Teaching Emma to ride a bike in the park. Coming home to someone who cares about me, not my bank account. He paused. Coming home to you. Sarah looked at this man who had appeared in her life like a guardian angel, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and desperate, and had chosen to help without asking for anything in return. I'm not looking for someone to rescue me, she said carefully. I've worked too hard to be independent, to give that up now. I wouldn't want you to, Mike said quickly. What I fell for was your strength, your determination, the way you've built a life for Emma all on your own. I don't want to change that. I just want to be part of it. And I want you to be part of it too, Sarah said, finally admitting to herself what she'd been feeling since their first conversation in the diner. But we take this slow, okay? For Emma's sake as much as ours. As slow as you want, Mike agreed. And no more secrets. If we're doing this, we do it honestly. No more secrets, Mike promised. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the window of their new apartment in Brooklyn. A place Mike had helped them find but that Sarah paid for with her salary from her new job, where she was already being considered for a promotion. Emma was in the kitchen with Mike, both of them covered in flour as they attempted to make cookies, their laughter filling the entire apartment. It wasn't the life Sarah had planned when she left Cleveland. It was better. She'd learned that sometimes getting lost in the rain is exactly what you need to find your way home. And sometimes the person who helps you when you need it most turns out to be the person you were meant to find all along. In his simple clothes and kind smile, Mike had shown her that love doesn't come with a price tag. It comes from showing up, from caring without expecting anything in return, from choosing each other every day. As Emma's delighted squeal echoed from the kitchen, followed by Mike's patient voice explaining that yes, they definitely put too much flour in the mixture, Sarah smiled and went to join her family. Their perfectly imperfect, complicated, beautiful family.